Hello and welcome to Farrell's Notebook. Today we are going to be creating this second gorgeous art journal page. This page is full of texture, washes of paint, and all made using pretty unconventional means. But the first thing that I'm going to do is put down some gesso. Now, if you haven't been here yet, I have been creating in this beautiful vintage photo album, and it has been so inspiring in that I know exactly what I'm going for when I open these pages. To me, it's very dark and moody, and it seems like a journal that just really wants a lot of texture. And so I have had so much fun with the texture that I have made in this journal. So here I'm using a catalyst tool to put down some gesso, and I'm using gesso for its intended purpose here. It's a primer. This is old vintage photo album paper. It's pretty fragile, pretty old, and I think if I started painting on top, it would disintegrate. And so adding this layer of gesso helps prime it and get it ready for the hundreds of layers that I am about to add on top. However, I also use gesso for texture. It is my first few layers where I usually create tons and tons of texture. And so instead of applying my gesso evenly and straight, I want to add as much texture to the page as I can. I do this by adding a second layer of gesso with this catalyst tool, now purposefully trying to make it as random and textured as I can. And then I'll also add texture by adding a lot of papers onto this page. And there's nothing more satisfying than pushing some gorgeous papers into a nice thick layer of gesso. Now, definitely pay attention to where I put these next few pieces, because at first you're going to think that I just completely paint over them and cover them up in the next layers, but they show up at the end in the coolest, most surprising way, because I basically forgot that they were there. And that is one of the things I love about doing layers like this. It gives you lots of surprises at the end, and it makes it so that you really can't predict exactly what the page will look like. Now, I've just added a square of a velour fabric here, and that is kind of my chaos element for this page. Adding this square of fabric. I love the color. It's part of the color scheme that I have envisioned. I'm using my pastels to kind of test out some of the other colors that I'm thinking about for this page. And I am going to now mix up a blue. I have some blue, some raw umber, and some ivory mixed together here to add some blue all over the page. And I have a composition in mind, and again, this piece of fabric is kind of my element of challenge that I am going to use to try to incorporate into the page. And honestly, it ended up making this page so beautiful and special that there's this rich velour fabric on there that you'll see how I paint on it and what I add. But first I'm going to add this moody blue that I was picturing all over the page and testing out how to paint on this fabric. I'm going to make some little flowers on there, and this part was still just a stage of play. These are the first layers. it's impossible to mess up. This is where I can test out my colors. I can see how that fabric works and see what it looks like when I blend the color that I want and when I blend it into the pastel. So it's really still playtime for me here, getting to paint on top of all this beautiful texture that I already made. Now that these first few layers are completely dry, it's time to start bringing that texture out, and I'm going to start with a wash of raw umber and a wash of some yellow ochre, and the two of those together make a green color that I can picture as some of the leaves peeking through. And you're going to see, I think I do like 7 washes by the time that I'm done, just to bring out more and more and more texture on these areas around the edge that I did not paint blue. So now it's time to start creating my abstract flowers. I am using just a cut off piece of a card here, and I love making flowers this way. This is actually a mixture of ivory and white gesso, and I'm just kind of mapping out where I want my flowers to go and trying to picture exactly how this will work and what I want my composition to be. And I am using the ivory and white so that I can come in later with some white to add some highlighting, and I'm also using some yellow ochre to make the centers here, and I mixed that color up, I think, with some raw umber and some white, or maybe I just used a little bit of ivory, I'm not sure, but I mixed up this color for the center. I'm going to add it all over the page because I'm still feeling out what I want the composition to be, how I'm going to incorporate everything, and always at every stage trying to really enjoy the process. One thing that I realized while I was making this art journal page is how important it is to me to have art that is not super tightly controlled. It was so life-changing for me when I first started creating in an art journal to realize art did not need to be perfect, that I could make bad art. And there's still a part of me that needs there to be some chaos on my pages. I need there to be imperfections and texture and unpredictability, because this is really what makes the process most satisfying to me. And honestly, it also is what makes the most beautiful outcomes. I love a page that has some serendipitous surprises, some texture, some, moments that aren't perfect. And I think I really brought that side out of me on this page. I loved how it turned out, and that I could, on the one hand, paint intuitively, but also make something that I found really beautiful. All right, it's time to add a little bit of white gesso to these flowers. I'm using the same little piece of card that I was before. This just adds a little bit more dimension and makes my flowers a little bit fluffier. And whenever I stepped back and took a look at the page, one thing that I saw from far away was that the flowers were too white, that I wanted white flowers but not literal white. If you look at a white flower, there's so many different shades of like light pink and browns and ivories in there. And so you'll see what I do about that at the very end of the page. So now I'm trying to figure out how to incorporate this piece of fabric a little bit more. So I'm going to carry some of that blue over onto the fabric, and then I'm going to come in again with some raw umber washes around the outside of my page. In order to connect my flowers a little more to the page, I'm going to use this Neo Pastel to draw in some leaves, some random marks, some stems, and add just some more of these little lines all over. And I love how these turn out, especially because not all of them make it to the very end of the page, but the ones that do survive look so great and just add to the layered, textured feel of the page. It is finally time to add some more washes and really bring this page together, create these edges, which are what I had pictured. So this is raw umber with a little bit of water, and I spread it out all over the page, and then I use a paper towel to wipe it off. And I do that several times to create the color that I want. And as I'm doing this, I realized that these washes would look beautiful on the flowers. It would really add them into this page even more. I'm going to show you what happens when you wipe these washes away, because it's very exciting to me that when you add them, you start to see all of the texture that was created in those first layers. Like every mark, every collage paper, every bit of gesso, you start to see all that texture when you add the raw umber. And we have lots of texture on these flowers too. from that little piece of card that I used to create them. And so using a much lighter wash, I'm going to add a little bit of that raw umber to each one of the flowers. And I also come back in with a little bit of alcohol on a rag. And what that does is it pulls up the raw umber and leaves it in all the nooks and crannies. And so it shades these flowers for me, but it also incorporates them more into the page so that they're not just swatches of white paint, but they're really part of this antique textured page that we have created. So after even more washes and some cleanup with the blue, I put alcohol on this paper towel and start to take up some paint, and look what happens. The green leaves that are under on this piece of collage paper come through, and it looks exactly like a leaf. And that's the type of thing that excites me so much. And I think these little spots that I create with taking up some of the paint in these sections are exactly what this page needs to further bring it all together. And this is a really fun final step because it's bringing together all the layers that I have made. It's showing the papers that are underneath and adding a little more of this aging to the page. I hope you enjoyed today's art journal page created in a vintage photo album. Let me know if you've ever created in something unconventional and if it has inspired you the way that this photo album has inspired me. This is your reminder that there are over 40 tutorials waiting for you at ko-fi.com/takeheart. With a monthly subscription, you can access every tutorial plus 2 new tutorials every month. They're all beginner friendly with a theme that you can apply to your life. Check it out.